Good morning. It is great to spend this moment with you today. This week has been filled with rain, replenishing, renewing rain. And what a day like today to spend our day in worship. Hope it's replenishing to you and renewing to your soul. To just be still and know that the Lord is God. That means so much to me, and I'm thankful to be able to spend this time with you today. So from time to time, I have told you about this goal that I have of running a marathon. And today I'm here to tell you I still haven't done it. I'm still all talk about that. But I still have this thing that I want to do, and someday I want to run a marathon. But today I want to tell you about something that I do not want to do. I do want to run a marathon someday if I can. What I don't want to do is run this marathon. It's called the Marathon of the Sands, and that is not Nevada in the background. That is Morocco, East Africa, which you may know for geography buffs is where the Sahara Desert is located. Many people come from across the globe to participate in what may be the hardest endurance event in the entire world, because it is not just one marathon that you run, but actually for 7 consecutive days in the Sahara Desert, you run the equivalent of a marathon. It's 155 miles in total. And I look at that and I think, why in the world would you want to do that? We actually had somebody local, a family from Colleyville, a husband and a wife and a 15-year-old daughter who decided they were going to do this. The Star-Telegram covered it. And I think that they made it about a day and a half of that 7-day race. And I think that's incredible. Because when they finally called it quits, on the day they called it quits, the high temperature was 125 degrees. So I think they made the right call. And then there's this fellow here. His name is Marco. Marco dreamed of completing this crazy race. Marco also had 3 children under the age of 5 and one wife who was just totally beside herself that he would consider leaving her and the 3 kids behind for a week and a half to go and do this ridiculous, dangerous thing. But he was determined, and he went and he participated in the race. And on day 4, he's doing really well. He's actually in 7th place. When all of a sudden the wind starts whipping up, and he finds himself in the midst of this sandstorm. Some of you folks may have been a part of a dust storm before. I doubt it was like this, because the sand is so thick and so hot that you can't see 2 feet in front of your face, and it continues like this for 8 hours. And for 8 hours, he is still pressing forward into this sandstorm. And then finally, it relents, and it slows down. He looks around. He's all alone. Is he in first place now? But also, all of the trail markers, they're not around either. And so he turns a full 360 degrees. He turns around. All he sees is sand in every direction. Identical sand in every direction. And so he just starts walking. And he walks for a day. And then another. And then another. On day 3, a rescue helicopter comes overhead, and he knows they're going to be looking for him. So quickly, he pulls out his flare gun, but it jams, and now it's useless. So he walks another day, and another day. And by chance, a small plane flies overhead. But he doesn't have his flare gun anymore, so he takes his lighter, and he lights his backpack on fire, and he's hoping that the smoke will go up and catch the plane's sight, but it just sails overhead. So now he's got no supplies. For 9 days, he goes on like this. He started in Morocco. He doesn't know it, but he's actually gone out of Morocco. Now he's in Algeria. He's gone over 100 miles off of his course. His water is dried up. His energy is depleted. Even his hope and his will is just about empty at this point. And at this moment, I think that Marco knows better than most of us what it might have been like to be Elijah. Now, I'm going to tell the rest of Marco's story a little later. But as extreme as it may seem to start with the story of a guy who's lost in the Sahara Desert, maybe that extremeness is actually extremely fitting for stepping into the story of Elijah, because one thing is for certain: Elijah is a person who knows what it's like to be drained and depleted. Elijah is a person who both physically and also spiritually knows what it's like to be dry and empty. And today, I want to press pause on our series in the Gospel of Luke that we've been going through and spend a little bit of time with Elijah's story. Because as extreme as it may be what Elijah goes through, I think that it's a story that can speak to us today. Because how many of us in our lives and in our faith have had those times when, it just feels dry? Like your soul, your energy, your passion, your patience, your whole life just feels dried up and worn out. Don't we know what that's like? And maybe for some who are here today, that might be the time that you're in right now. What do we do when we're in times like that? Well, that's why I want to spend some time with Elijah's story this morning. It is a story for those times in our lives and in our faith when the streams run dry. And I think it has something to say to us today. So Elijah's story is definitely one like that. In fact, the very first time that we meet Elijah, this is 1 Kings chapter 17. If you'd like to get out a Bible, you can follow along. We're going to be drawing from 17, 18, and 19 of 1 Kings, kind of the first three big moments in the life of Elijah. But from the very first time that we meet him, verse 1 of chapter 17, the first words out of Elijah's mouth announce that this is going to be a season of dryness coming here. So listen to what he says, verse 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." So here's Elijah. He steps onto the scene, and what does he announce? There's going to be this unprecedented time of drought. Even worse than that, there's going to be this unspecified time of drought. We don't know how long this is going to last. All we know is that there's going to be neither rain nor dew that falls, and it's not going to be short. Over the next few years is what Elijah says to the people. And that doesn't sound good. So here we have this time of dryness. And this is going to be challenging. But if we look closely, we can already see two things about this challenging time. And there are two things that, when you're in the thick of it, are probably pretty hard to see. The first one is that even though this time may be a difficult time, and when you're in it, it might feel unending, in fact, it is not. Now, nobody knows, not even Elijah seems to know how long this is going to last. And if you can put yourself in their shoes and imagine you're in the thick of it, it ends up lasting 3.5 years. Imagine you're at year 2 or 3 of that. At that point, you're probably thinking, I don't know when this is going to end. This feels endless to me. But in fact, it's not endless. There is a limit to this difficult season. And it might feel that way, but it's not, because of the second thing. And the second thing we see in that very first verse is that the Lord is still God. Elijah said that all these things are going to happen just as surely as the Lord your God lives. And he does live. And just as surely as these things are going to happen, they are also going to pass. This is going to come to an end. It will come to an end when God says so. When God, through Elijah, speaks a word, it's going to come to an end because the Lord is still God. Now, these two things, I think, are just like really important things for us to hold on to. Because these two things we see in the very first verse are things that are not just true of this verse. They're not just true of Elijah's story. They're actually things that God teaches us throughout his word, things that are true for us today. My favorite example is the book of Lamentations. We don't spend a lot of time with Lamentations, but has anyone ever told you that the book of Lamentations is actually a poem? It's an acrostic poem. You remember acrostic poems from when you were kids? Maybe you wrote one of these in elementary school. It's one of those poems where like maybe the first line starts with A, and the next one with B, and the next one with C. Or I had a picture here of one that spells out Jesus, or maybe you did one for your mother on Mother's Day. Free idea. Mother's Day is next week. You could write an acrostic poem for her. But you remember doing these as kids. The book of Lamentations is like that. It's a very sophisticated, very artistic acrostic. So the book begins, the first line, with like the Hebrew equivalent of the letter A, and then it goes down and down through the alphabet until it gets to the Hebrew equivalent of the letter Z. And when it gets there, it starts over again. A to Z, A to Z. Throughout the book, it does this 4 times from start to finish, just A to Z, A to Z. And the book is about all these hard times. It's about the exile. It's when Jerusalem is destroyed. God's people are in this tough spot, this really difficult moment. And if you're in the thick of that, it probably feels unending. But even that A to Z, A to Z, A to Z, it's saying something. The troubles God's people are facing, they're not numbered. You know, a numbered list can go on endlessly, go on to infinity. This dry season of Israel is not numbered, it's lettered. And it has an A, a beginning, but it also has a Z. And despite how it may feel, the dry season is not what is unending. What is in fact unending, according to Lamentations, is that the steadfast love of the Lord, that's what doesn't end. And the Lord, who is God, his mercy, that is what is never ceasing. And as hard as it may be for Israel to endure this dry time, this difficult time, they can keep this thought in mind and have hope. The present troubles we face, well, they may seem unending, but there is a limit. It's kind of like what Romans says when it says the present sufferings are not worth comparing to the glory one day revealed, because through it all, the Lord is still God. And I wonder if maybe that's the lesson of Elijah's story. Maybe it's actually the lesson that Elijah himself needs to learn. If you look at his story carefully, and we're going to fly through it today, but if you look through his story carefully, what you find is that this theme is not just something we see in verse 1. It's actually like all throughout Elijah's life and his story, things are just like constantly drying up everywhere. So after Elijah announces that there's going to be this big drought, the very next thing that happens, next verse, is that the Lord gives Elijah what he needs. He provides for what he's going to need. God leads him to this quiet stream of water, and he gives him food, and he gives him this water, and all the good things that Elijah needs, he has them right here. But then verse 7, this brook, this stream that God led Elijah to, it dries up. And you might look at that and you're like, why? God led him to this stream, but then the stream just dries up. So now Elijah's got to move. And God tells him, okay, when you move, I want you to go way, way far to the north, like outside of Israel even, and you're going to find this widow there. She's not from Israel. She's a foreign widow, and she's going to take care of everything that you need. So Elijah journeys all the way through Israel and above it to get to this place where the widow lives. She's going to take care of his needs. But no sooner does he get there, he finds the widow, and what does she say to him? But this is my last meal. Verse 12, she's like gathering up sticks, and she's going to take the last bit of bread that she has and make some food for her son and for herself. And she's thinking, this is all of it. This is it. I will eat this food. It will be my last meal. And this is the person who God sent Elijah to, all the way across the country to provide for his needs. And when he gets there, what she has is just totally run dry. And it's not just physical things either. So the woman and Elijah get through this. We'll talk about that in a second. But then pretty soon there's just another tragedy. Her only son, whom she loves, gets sick and he dies. And the woman had come to know and trust Elijah over all this time, and maybe even trust in his God. And now that trust just totally crumbles. Whatever trust she had just dries up right there. She says, what have you done? Did you come to me so that my son would die? Did you come to me to kill my son? And even Elijah says something, Lord God, have you brought this tragedy even on this widow? After all the things you've taken, even this too? Everything withering around me, and this too? You see, these are lean times, like hard times of the soul here. Her trust just dries up. In the next chapter, chapter 18, Elijah has the greatest triumph of his entire life and prophetic ministry. It's on Mount Carmel. You may remember the story. But even this triumph that he has does not insulate him from these times when he's depleted, these times when he's dry. So in that moment, he has all of this courage in him. And even though he's just one man, and there's 450 prophets of Baal, and his life is on the line, he calls upon God to prove himself. God validates himself, validates Elijah's faith. All the people who had turned to idols, they say, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. It's the triumph of triumphs. And not 2 days later, where do we find Elijah? But he's afraid and running from his life. He lies down under a broom bush. He sits down and prays that he might die. I've had enough, he says. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. All that courage, you notice how it's kind of just eroded here. Notice how he's just like beating himself up now. I'm not good enough for this. His hope has just completely run empty. He's tired. He's worn down. He feels alone. You read these stories, each verse of them, you keep hearing him say, I'm the only one left. I'm the only one left. I'm the only one left. Because that's how he feels. What I'm saying is Elijah is well acquainted with these times when the stream runs dry. The land runs dry. God gives him a stream. It runs dry. He goes and finds the widow. What she has runs dry. Her trust starts to crumble around him. Even Elijah's courage and his hope, they start to wear out. Elijah knows what this feels like in his body and in his spirit and in his faith. Like even this guy we look up to, he has these times like this. But just as surely as Elijah knows what it's like to run empty, just as surely Elijah sees and he learns how every time what seemed unending comes to an end, and through it all, the Lord is still God. So take a look at that list of things that happened to him again. Can you imagine that not only God might do something with all these things, but actually use them to teach and grow his people? So the Lord caused that drought upon the land. Why would he do that? In this case, he's teaching them how perilous it is, how bad it is to chase after idols. And so he gives them this difficult season to go through, but not forever. When the time is right, God sends his renewing rain upon the cracked and thirsty earth. They look out in the distance, they see a cloud the size of a fist. And before they know it, the sky grows black, the wind rises, the rain falls heavy on the earth. God renews his land. We saw how the Lord allowed that stream to just dry up, even though he had led Elijah to that very stream. Could God be teaching something with that too? Is there some kind of lesson in that? Maybe it's the lesson that it's not the thing itself you put your trust in. It's not that stream we put our trust in, but the Lord who led you there. The Lord who made that stream run. The Lord who is still God. And when the stream dries up, yeah, Elijah has to pick up and move, but God still gives him what he needs. God still provides for him what he needs. The thing changes, but God doesn't. And then the widow, she runs out of all of her oil and her flour, it seems, but God is faithful to his promises. And so what does he do? But he makes sure that oil doesn't really run out. Actually, what it says is that the oil and the flour will not run dry. Will not run dry until the time when God brings rain again. So the stream dried up and the supplies looked like they would too, but the Lord was still God. And in his timing, he still provided. Well, what about that time when the widow's trust dries up? In time, God gives her yet another reason to trust. She's already seen him work through her oil and her flour, but now God's going to show this widow that even death is not too great for him. So Elijah stretches out his hand over the boy whose life was taken, and he calls out to the Lord, and now he lives again. And look at what the woman says. She says, "Now I know." Her trust is restored, replenished, like when rain falls to the earth. Now I know this is God. His word is true. And even when Elijah is so filled with doubt and so discouraged that he just feels like he can't take another step, can't go any further, that's not how God leaves him, is it? Even God uses that dark valley to teach him, to shape him, and to prepare him to go and continue the race. And I wonder, could he do the same thing for you and me? When we face those dry seasons in our life and in our faith, it's very easy, and honestly, it's more than understandable to feel how Elijah feels through it all. Because we all have those times. And if we don't, we will at some point. Psalm 23 talks about sometimes you're in the pastures green and other times you're not. You're in that dark valley. Part of our journey of faith is that there may be times when we're depleted, we're dry, we're feeling empty. But what Elijah teaches us and what God shows us in these stories is that sometimes how we're feeling in those moments is not the ultimate thing. Some things can be true despite our feelings, and the steadfast love of the Lord is one of those things. Maybe one of the other things we learn from this is that sometimes we don't always see the full picture. I think about Marco in that sandstorm. He's trying to press forward, but he can only see like 2 feet from his face. Elijah's like that too. He keeps saying things like, "I'm not enough. I can't go any further. I'm the only one left." And that seems right to him from what he can see, but in fact, what God sees is not that. He sees something more. And what if these times that we face are really important in God's hands to shape us, to teach us, to help us to come to realizations about who we're meant to be, how we need to grow? Go back to my friend Marco here. Marco, our desert runner, had walked 9 miles at this point in the desert. And he had a moment like that. One of those moments that this is a dry time for him. He realizes something that he needs to learn. So 9 days in the desert, he's looking out and he sees over a sand dune, he sees like the little rooftop of something in the distance. So he drags his weary legs all the way to it. He's hoping maybe somebody's going to be there. He gets there and nobody's there. It's actually like an old Bedouin mausoleum, an old tomb. And how ominous is that? Like 9 days in the desert, he goes and he takes shelter in this tomb, this empty tomb. And he spends the night there. And while he's there, he's kind of thinking, maybe this is going to be it for me. So he picks up a rock and he writes on the wall this letter to his wife and his kids that he thinks they're never going to see. He basically says he says, forgive me. It was selfish of me to run off like this. Just know that I love you. And he goes to sleep. And then when he wakes up the next morning, someone's standing over him. And there he is alive in this tomb, thirsty and ready to go home. And it was like that for Elijah too. In his case, he's standing at the mouth of this cave. He's worn out, he's depleted. He thinks he's ready to call it quits. What he learns is that he's not alone. So this great powerful wind goes by, and the Bible says the Lord wasn't in the wind. And there's this earthquake, and then there's this fire, and then there's the sound of a gentle whisper. Sound of a gentle whisper. And he knew that it was the Lord, and he knew that he wasn't alone. His life had gone so far off the track, but God met his thirsty soul with the message that he needed, the hope that only God can provide. He told him he wasn't alone. And maybe that's what you need to hear today. Like whether you're facing one of those like dry times, a dry season right now, or whether that's something you've been through or maybe something you might one day go through, I hope that Elijah's story can give us that perspective that we need that's so hard to get when you're in the thick of it. That perspective that says there's something bigger than this. And this is not forever. The Lord is still God, and I am not alone. When I go off track, he can track me down and find me. When I'm dry, he's able to fill me. When I face trials, he could be teaching me. So I will hold on. I'll listen for his voice, even if it's just a whisper. I'll trust his word because he probably sees, he does see what we don't see. I'll trust in him because his word can even make the driest streams to flow again. Maybe somebody hears this today and you need to respond to this message. Maybe it gives you the encouragement you need. For someone here today, maybe you need to come to what we sing about in songs all the time, those streams of mercy, never ceasing. We sang those words today. When we're baptized in the name of Jesus, we're washed in his blood and cleansed of our sins, and we're reminded that we're not alone, and wherever we go in this life, God is with us. We take hold of his salvation. Perhaps you're ready to respond to that today. However you may be challenged or encouraged today, I would invite you to respond while we stand, while we sing.